I've always enjoyed driving at night. The roads are quiet, the air is cool, and there's something peaceful about being the only car on a long stretch of empty highway. I used to go on late-night drives just to clear my head, sometimes for hours, letting the hum of the tires and the rhythm of the streetlights lull me into calm. But that was before the night the white pickup truck followed me. Now, I don't drive at night unless I absolutely have to. This happened about 3 years ago, in early autumn. I was visiting my sister and her family in a rural town about 2 hours from where I lived. It was a small place nestled between fields and woods, pretty during the day, but eerily isolated once the sun went down. I stayed later than I planned, helping put my niece to bed, then chatting too long over tea. By the time I finally got on the road, it was nearly 11:45 p.m. I remember checking the time because I sighed, realizing I wouldn't be home until close to 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't mind. The roads were empty, and I had a full tank of gas and a playlist queued up. For the first 30 minutes, everything was normal. Then I saw headlights behind me. It was a flat stretch of road with few turns and even fewer houses. When a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, I noticed immediately. A white pickup truck. Nothing strange about that. It's a common enough vehicle out here. But what struck me was how fast it was gaining on me. I was already doing 5 over the limit, but the truck was closing the distance fast, its high beams flashing sporadically. I moved into the right lane, expecting it to pass. It didn't. Instead, it slid in behind me. Close. Too close. Its headlights were practically burning into my back seat. At first, I thought maybe the driver was just impatient or drunk. I tapped my brakes lightly, a warning. Not a full stop, just a flicker to say, back off. The truck backed off for a few seconds. Then it sped up again. Now it was tailgating me, swerving slightly, its high beams flicking on and off in quick flashes that made it impossible to see. I started to sweat. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I kept checking the mirror, heart beginning to race. There were no other cars, no gas stations, no exits, just 2 vehicles on a dark, rural road, and one of them was acting like a predator. After 10 minutes of this, I took a hard turn onto a side road. My plan was simple, see if he was really following me. The road curved sharply and cut through a wooded area. It was darker, narrower, definitely not a shortcut. I slowed a bit, waiting. 10 seconds later, the white pickup truck turned in behind me. No hesitation. At that point, the fear really kicked in. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call the police. I had no signal out there. I thought about turning around, but the road was too narrow and the truck was too close. I couldn't stop without giving him the chance to get out of his vehicle. So I kept driving. I passed a few dirt roads and private driveways, but none looked safe to pull into. That's when I saw a sign ahead. Old Mill Road, dead end. Normally, I would never have taken it, but something told me I had to try anything to get away from him. I turned. So did he. The road sloped down toward a small gravel clearing, surrounded by trees and thick brush. I pulled in fast, cut my lights, and killed the engine. Then I waited, heart pounding. I didn't breathe. I watched the entrance to the clearing through my rearview mirror. A minute passed, then another. Nothing. No headlights. No engine. Just the creak of trees and the dull tick of my cooling engine. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd lost him. Then the truck appeared. It didn't pull into the clearing. It stopped right at the entrance. Its high beams flicked on, flooding the woods with white light. The truck sat there, motionless, the engine idling softly. I ducked low in my seat, trying to stay out of view. The driver didn't get out, didn't move, just waited. I felt like a rabbit in a trap. After what felt like forever, probably 10 minutes, the truck reversed slowly and rolled back onto the road. Its headlights disappeared. I didn't move. I stayed there another 15 minutes, too afraid to turn on the engine. When I finally did, I crept back onto the main road and drove slowly, scanning the woods for movement. The rest of the drive was quiet, but I kept checking my mirrors. The next morning, I reported the incident to the local police. Gave them the make and color of the truck, the road names, everything I could remember. They nodded politely, said they'd keep an eye out, but I could tell they'd heard it all before. Rural roads attract the wrong kind of people sometimes. And without a plate or a face, there wasn't much they could do. A few weeks later, I was visiting my sister again. We were having coffee on her porch when her neighbor, an older man named Jeff, came by to chat. Out of nowhere, he said, "You know, someone's been scaring folks on the back roads lately. White pickup. Chases him off the road. Then just disappears." I froze. He nodded like it was an old tale. Used to be a guy in a white Ford who ran folks off that way back in the 90s. Drunk driver. Killed a teenage girl. Went missing before he was arrested. Never found the body. Some say he's still out there. He laughed a little, like it was folklore. But I didn't laugh, because I saw that truck. And I swear to you, there was no one behind the wheel. I don't scare easily. I've driven through wild storms, gotten lost in unfamiliar cities, even had a close encounter with a bear while camping. But what happened to me one foggy night in the back roads of West Virginia? That changed everything. It was a Thursday in mid-October. I just wrapped up a visit to my grandmother's house. She lives in a rural area outside of Parsons. I stayed longer than planned, as always. She loves to talk, and I hadn't seen her in a few months. By the time I left, it was almost 9:30 p.m., and the sun had long dipped below the ridgeline. Still, I wasn't worried. The drive home was a familiar tower stretch, mostly empty back roads, and I'd done it dozens of times. I gassed up at a little station just outside town and took Route 72 through the Monongahela Forest. It's a scenic drive during the day, winding and quiet with golden autumn leaves fluttering on both sides. But at night, it's something else entirely. Pitch black. No cell service. No traffic. And just a narrow, winding road snaking through dense woods. That night, it was made worse by fog. Thick, rolling, almost unnatural fog. It hovered low on the ground, not drifting, but sitting settled, like it belonged there. After about 30 minutes on that road, I was deep into the forest stretch when I saw it. A figure in the road. At first, it looked like a shadow or a deer, maybe even a mailbox leaning too far. But as I got closer, it resolved into a human shape. A man, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. I slowed my car, flicked my high beams on. He was maybe 6 feet tall, dressed in dark, layered clothing, looked like a hoodie under a long jacket. His head was slightly bowed, arms hanging at his sides. Not swaying, not reacting, just motionless. I brought the car to a stop about 15 feet from him. I couldn't see his face clearly through the fog, but there was something wrong about the way he was standing. Rigid, tense, like he'd been there for hours or had just dropped out of the sky. I rolled my window down slightly and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" Nothing, not even a twitch. My headlights were casting a long shadow behind him, but he never shifted. I stayed there for at least a full minute. The silence was crushing. Just me, the idling engine, the faint hiss of the heater, and a man standing in the road like time had stopped. I was about to back up and go around him when he did something that still gives me chills. He pointed, very slowly, with his right arm. He lifted a single finger and gestured toward the trees on the left side of the road. That was it. He didn't speak. Didn't look at me. Just pointed. Something primal in me surged to life. Fight or flight mode. Adrenaline. I had the sudden realization that whatever he was pointing at, I wasn't supposed to see it, or I wasn't supposed to be here at all. I hit the gas, sped around him, keeping as far to the opposite lane as I could. As I passed, I turned to look at him, just for a split second. He hadn't turned to watch me go. Still standing. Still pointing. About 2 minutes later, I hit a curve in the road and was relieved to finally leave him behind. That's when I saw another figure, on the right side of the road this time, standing on the edge of the trees. This one was smaller, maybe a woman, or a child. Hard to tell. They wore a thick coat, but pulled up, had tilted up slightly like they were trying to see me through the fog. I didn't slow down, just kept driving. But then I saw a third one, then a fourth. Every few hundred feet, another person, always off to the side, always still, always facing the road. Some in coats, some in simple clothing. A few with no visible face, just shadows beneath hoods or hair. They weren't walking. They weren't moving. They were waiting, watching, like silent statues placed at random intervals along the roadside. I drove faster, white-knuckled, hyper-aware of every turn in the road. The only time I braked was when a deer darted out in front of me, and for a brief, horrible moment, I thought it was another person. Eventually, I made it out of the woods and back to civilization. I pulled into a 24-hour diner on the edge of Elkins, parked under the brightest floodlight I could find, and just sat there, heart pounding. I stayed in the car for almost an hour before I felt brave enough to go inside. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? I saw people standing in the woods. When I finally made it home that night, I triple-checked the locks and closed every curtain, But sleep didn't come easy. I kept seeing that first man. The way he stood. The way he pointed. Like he knew something was waiting in the trees. Like he was warning me. Or worse, showing me. It didn't stop there. For the next few weeks, every time I drove alone at night, I started noticing them. Not every time, but often enough. A figure in the distance. On the side of the road. Still. Watching. Sometimes I'd blink, and they'd be gone. Other times, they'd be there the whole drive, until the trees ended. I don't drive at night anymore. Not if I can help it. Because I'm afraid that one night, I'll stop, and finally see what they were pointing at. I've always believed the most terrifying experiences don't start with screaming or blood or monsters. They start with something small, something quiet, out of place, a sound, a glance, a car with its doors open where no car should be. This story happened in May of 2020. It was during one of those pandemic lulls when restrictions eased up and people were hungry to move, to escape their homes and their heads. I'd just done a 3-day solo hiking trip in the Ozarks, a last-minute decision spurred by boredom and restlessness. By the end, I was sore, sunburnt, and ready for my bed. It was around 12:30 a.m. when I finally hit the road. The route home took me through rural southern Missouri, long stretches of nothing but hills, trees, and blacktop. No cell signal. No lights except the moon and the dim, rhythmic sweep of my headlights. I was about an hour into the drive, still deep in the woods, when I saw the first sign that something was wrong. It was a car, pulled over on the shoulder, angled slightly into the ditch. Its hazard lights were blinking, casting orange flashes against the dark bark of the trees. The vehicle looked like a silver or gray sedan, older, maybe late 90s, boxy. Both the driver and front passenger doors were open. That was the first thing that hit me as wrong. Not one door. Both. The second thing was the interior dome light, still on, faint and flickering. No one was inside. No movement. I slowed almost instinctively. The road was narrow and curved slightly, meaning I had to inch forward just to see around the car. As I did, I saw the back seat. Someone or something was in it. At first, I thought it was just a leg. Pale. Still. Resting strangely across the back seat like someone had laid down and passed out drunk. But something about the angle felt posed. Too clean. Too deliberate. I pulled to a stop maybe 30 feet back. Kept the engine running. Something in my gut told me not to get out. Instead, I just sat there, hand hovering near the gear shift, eyes locked on the scene in front of me. That's when I saw movement. Not in the car. Behind it, a figure emerged, low and fast, from the ditch on the opposite side. Not walking. Crawling. Whoever it was, they were trying not to be seen. Dressed in dark clothes, moving like an animal. Then a second shape further in the woods. Then a third, even closer. All crouched. All still. Watching me. My hand moved on its own. Gear shift into reverse. I backed up slowly, wheels crunching over gravel. And then, just for a moment, I saw the one crawling look up. We locked eyes. I couldn't see their full face, just a glint of eyeshine in the darkness. They weren't shocked. They weren't panicking. They were smiling. I floored it. Sped back down the road the way I came, heart in my throat, tires screeching around a tight corner I nearly misjudged. I drove for what felt like miles, then saw a clearing, a dirt access road to a farm or maybe a hunting path. I pulled off, killed the lights, and waited. I sat in silence for at least 10 minutes, parked in the trees, engine off. My mind was racing. What had I just seen? Was it a car accident? A robbery? Some kind of prank? Or a trap? Eventually, I decided to keep going, take a different route, and avoid the area completely. I pulled up the offline map I downloaded and plotted a longer course back home through county roads. 30 minutes later, I was back on track, now on a back road I'd never taken before. The night had grown colder. I rolled up the windows and turned the heat on low. And that's when I saw it again. The same car, same silver sedan, same angle in the ditch, same blinking hazards, same 2 doors open, same leg, draped over the back seat like a mannequin in a crime scene photo. But I had not looped back. I checked the GPS. I had driven miles out of the way, crossed a bridge, passed a gas station, even turned onto 2 new routes. There was no way I could have circled back. And yet, there it was. Exactly the same. I didn't slow down this time. I kept going, but my hands were shaking. I stared ahead, barely blinking. A mile down the road, I passed a car going the opposite direction, a small blue hatchback. I wanted to flag them down, to yell out the window, to warn them. But I didn't. I just prayed they wouldn't stop. I finally made it to a rest stop around 2:30 a.m. It was a small one, just 2 vending machines, 1 flickering light, and an ancient map board behind smudged glass. There were 2 other vehicles parked. One was empty. The other had a woman inside, reclined in the driver's seat, eyes closed. I didn't want to wake her. I walked around, pacing, trying to shake the image of that car, of those people in the trees. Then I noticed a payphone next to the vending machines. Dusty, dead, but tucked into the coin return slot was a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out. 1 line, written in red ink. They used the same car every time. I stared at it for a long time. Then I left. Didn't sleep when I got home. Didn't tell anyone for a while. A few months later, I met someone at a party, friend of a friend. We were talking about weird road experiences, and I cautiously brought up the stalled car. Didn't go into too much detail. They froze, then said, "Did it have a back door open and a leg in the seat?" I said yes. They nodded. I saw it too. Different state. Same setup. Same car. There are rumors online. Stories. Forums where people compare sightings. Theories range from serial killers to urban legends to government experiments. Some say it's a ghost car. Others say it's part of a cult that uses identical vehicles as a kind of calling card. A ritual. But here's what I know. That car wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. And whoever or whatever was inside it already knew my face. Because 2 weeks after that night, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. No caller ID. The message was just 6 words, spoken in a calm, familiar voice. "Next time, you won't see us." It was raining the night I saw the lights. Not a hard, violent rain. Just that steady, rhythmic kind that drums softly on your roof and makes everything outside feel farther away. The kind that seems to muffle the world. I was driving home after a weekend visit with my uncle in a rural part of Virginia. I'd stayed longer than planned, and by the time I hit the road, it was nearly 11:45 p.m. The road I took home was a state highway that cut through miles of farmland, swampland, and forest. No gas stations for 30 miles. No billboards. Just 1 lane each direction and the occasional reflective sign to remind you you were still somewhere. The rain, the darkness, and the isolation didn't bother me. In fact, I almost found it peaceful until the flickering began. It started subtly. My headlights caught something odd through the rain. A brief pulse of light, far off down the road. At first, I thought it was lightning, but the sky was a uniform gray, and I hadn't heard thunder all night. I slowed down a little. Another flash, this time brighter. It looked like a pair of headlights flickering erratically, then vanishing into the rain. Maybe a stalled car? A short in someone's battery? Hazards going haywire? It was late. I was tired, and my mind was playing catch-up. But then I turned a bend and saw the lights again, this time much closer. And this time, I realized they weren't headlights at all. They were coming from the middle of the road. A cluster of flickering, white-blue lights, faint but distinct, hovering at about eye level. Not attached to any vehicle, just hanging there. I slowed to a crawl, windshield wipers squeaking. The lights moved. Not away, not toward me. Side to side, almost dancing. They blinked in and out, shifting from one position to another like fireflies, but too bright, too patterned. Not natural, not random. I came to a full stop, turned my brights on. There was nothing in front of me. No car, no people, no animals. Just wet pavement and the empty black silhouettes of trees flanking both sides. And then, the lights were gone. I sat there for a moment, heart thumping harder than it should have. I told myself it could have been a reflection. Maybe power lines I didn't notice. A weird trick of moisture and headlights. My brain trying to apply logic. But then I noticed something else. The road ahead was dry. Completely dry. While the road behind me was soaked from the steady rain, the pavement in front of me was clean, untouched. Like the rain had stopped in that one specific place. I checked the temperature on my dash, 53 degrees Fahrenheit. No freezing, no fog. But the air suddenly felt colder. Heavier. Almost like stepping into a room where someone had just left or hadn't. I debated turning around. But I was deep into nowhere and my tank was low. I eased forward. The moment I crossed into the dry zone, my radio, previously playing soft static shut off completely. I reached down to check the knob. Everything was lit. My phone still charging, but the audio was gone. I turned it off and kept driving. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Nothing happened. Just the soft roll of tires and the faint hush of rain behind me. I began to relax. That was my second mistake. I saw the lights again, but this time they were behind me. I caught them in the rearview mirror. A fast, sharp flicker, like someone flipping a switch on and off. I squinted, trying to focus. The rain distorted the reflection, but I was sure of it. They were following me, hovering low. No vehicle, no beam, just points of light, blinking on and off like a bad signal. And then, something even worse. They were getting closer. I floored it. The engine roared. I sped through curves and soaked pavement, tires sliding dangerously on wet turns. The lights stayed in the mirror, sometimes gone, then blinking back in, closer each time. They never changed position, just the same flickering pattern, like they were studying me. Then, after a sharp bend in the road, I lost them. Gone. Nothing in the mirror but taillights and rain. I slowed, cautiously hopeful. But as I approached a hill, my headlights illuminated something ahead. A figure, standing on the center line, not moving, wearing what looked like a long coat or cloak, soaked and sagging with rain. Their head was bowed. I slowed again, pulled to the side, keeping distance. I rolled down the window slightly and shouted, "Do you need help?" No response, not even a twitch. The figure's arms were slack, their face still hidden beneath tangled hair. Something in my chest screamed, "Drive." And I did. I swerved around them and didn't look back, but I still saw it in my mirror. As I passed, they looked up, eyes glowing with the same blue-white flicker I had seen earlier. When I finally made it to the next town, I pulled into a diner lot and sat shaking in my seat. I checked my phone, signal restored. I opened my radio app. It worked. Everything was normal. But when I stepped out of the car, I noticed something strange. The rain had returned. And yet, my car was bone dry. I've looked for stories like mine online. Found a few scattered posts about lights on rural roads, figures in the rain, roadside apparitions. Some call them spirits. Others say they're government tech. Some say it's a weather phenomenon we don't understand. But I don't think it was any of that. I think I drove through something that night. Somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. A thin place. Maybe a wrinkle in reality. One of those moments when the world you know slips just a little, and something else pushes through the gap to look at you, to follow you, to see if you'll notice. And maybe, to see if you'll come back. I used to love driving at night. Something about the solitude, the open roads, the feeling of being between places, detached from the world, made it feel almost meditative, peaceful. But since that night last spring, I don't drive after midnight anymore, especially not through the mountains. This happened in April 2022, during a solo drive from Boulder, Colorado, to a cabin my friend owns near Steamboat Springs. I was heading up for a few days of isolation, no phone service, no internet, just snowmelt and silence. I left too late. It was past 10:30 p.m. when I finally pulled onto Highway 40, the last major stretch before the mountain roads took over. The temperature had dropped sharply. Rain was threatening, the sky heavy and bruised. Still, I figured I'd be fine. I'd driven that way before, and I knew the roads. Or I thought I did. The first hour passed uneventfully. Nothing but dark curves and empty lanes. There were no other cars, no open gas stations, and no light except what spilled from my high beams. Then, somewhere just after crossing into Routt County, I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, just past a narrow bend. A figure in a long gray coat, soaked through, one arm lifted in a half-hearted wave. The image flashed past me in an instant. There wasn't even time to react. My brain scrambled to process. Was that a woman? Was she hitchhiking? Was she hurt? I thought about turning around, but the road was too narrow and steep to reverse safely. I figured maybe it was someone who'd broken down, maybe trying to walk to the next town. Still, something didn't feel right. A few miles later, I started second-guessing myself. Had I imagined her? The fog had begun to roll in by then, thick in patches, thinning in others. The world outside was reduced to blurred outlines and brief glimpses. I was gripping the wheel harder than I realized when I saw her again. This time, standing directly under a mile marker, barely visible through the fog. Same coat, same stance, same lifted arm. No car nearby. No backpack. Just her. My stomach flipped. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me. I'd been going 60 the whole time. I pressed on, unease growing by the minute. I turned the radio up, only to find static. The mountain signal always came and went, but this time it was different, rhythmic, like a low humming beneath the fuzz. Then, out of nowhere, my car heater shut off. The air went dead cold. I checked the dials, still on. Still warm, but no sound, no airflow. My headlights began to flicker. Just once. Then again. Then steady. That's when I passed her a third time. She was in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes and swerved, barely missing her by inches. My car fishtailed, and I had to fight the wheel to keep from sliding off the edge. When I came to a stop, heart pounding, I looked in the rearview mirror. She was gone. I got out, against every screaming instinct in my head. I stood in the rain, wind howling through the canyon walls, I scanning the trees. Nothing. No footprints. No figure. Just quiet. I got back in and locked the doors. From then on, I drove slower, more cautious. But the damage was done. The piece of the drive was shattered. I turned onto the final stretch of road, Black Hollow Pass, a winding climb through a remote area of forest with no guardrails and no lights. The fog was thicker here. It didn't drift or move like normal mist, it hovered, as if waiting for something. And in the center of that fog, there she was again. She wasn't waving anymore. She was facing away from me, standing in the exact center of the lane. Her coat still dripped. Her hands hung by her sides. I slowed to a crawl. I didn't want to hit her, but I wasn't going to stop either. Then she did something I will never forget. Without turning around, she lifted one hand and pointed upward, straight into the trees above. I followed her gesture. There was nothing there. Just a canopy of twisted branches and low clouds. When I looked back down, she was gone. I was almost to the cabin by then. The gravel access road was only a few miles ahead, and my hands had started to shake. I turned off onto the path and drove until I saw the familiar clearing and the dark silhouette of the cabin nestled in the trees. I parked, ran to the porch, and got the key from under the mat. Inside, I didn't bother unpacking. I turned on every light and sat on the couch, just trying to slow my breathing. Then I heard it. A tap. Just one. On the window behind me. I didn't turn around at first. I couldn't. But slowly, I stood and looked. There was nothing there. Just the window pane, fogged from the inside. And on the outside of the glass, a single wet handprint. Small, delicate, facing inward. The next morning, I went out to check the property. My friend keeps cameras set up around the cabin perimeter to watch for bears and intruders. I played back the footage from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. And in the corner of one clip, near the tree lean, I saw her, standing just outside the reach of the motion lights, watching the house. She didn't move. Not once. I told my friend what happened when he arrived 2 days later. He went pale when I mentioned the road. You drove through Black Hollow? At night? I nodded. He rubbed his face, visibly disturbed. They've been telling stories about that hitchhiker since the 70s. Always a woman in gray. Always waving. People say if you stop and let her in, she rides with you until you reach the overlook at Devil's Bend. Then she disappears. I waited. He didn't finish. So I asked, and if you don't stop? He looked at me, dead serious. Then she follows you home. I've been back to the cabin since then. Once. Daytime only. And I still drive that road sometimes. But never at night. And never alone. Because the scariest part isn't what I saw on the road. It's that some nights, I still catch the faintest scent of wet roses and old wool in the passenger seat. In the window fogs. Just enough to leave room for another handprint.